enforcement as if it was aggressive. Well, that to have a president of a country from another country who watched his bully boys beat Americans into the ground and bloody them, and for him to protest our people, that is the supreme insult. And I hope all Americans understand the message that he's giving us. I will refrain from using a hand gesture of what he is giving us. But we have a message for him. We don't need people like you visiting the United States anymore. You don't represent your people. When we want to talk to the Turks, we want to talk to Turks who want to have a democratic society and not to their oppressor and a man who's trying to create Islamofascism in his own country with him as the head fascist. This arrogance is beyond the pale. Erdogan should never again be invited to the United States. He is an enemy of everything we stand for. More importantly, he is an enemy of his own people. And we should side with the people of Turkey, not with their oppressor. Perhaps such an incident would not be so offensive, except that it fits a pattern of broader political violence and suppression that has come to characterize the current Turkish government, both at home and abroad. I remind everyone that a similar incident occurred during President Erdogan's previous visit to Washington. Last March, while Erdogan spoke at a Brookings Foundation, his guards attacked protesters and journalists trying to cover the event. The repressive and authoritarian nature of the Erdogan government has been developing and just basically becoming into being right in front of our eyes. A country that has been such a long friend of the United States. The people of Turkey who stood with us during the Cold War, when it was very risky to do so. And yes, the Soviet Union was pumping at that time millions of dollars into destabilize Turkey at that time, but they stood with us. And now to have this leader, or supposed leader, basically declaring that friendship is over and declaring that his people no longer have those democratic rights that they've enjoyed for these years, well, it's totally unacceptable. And again, I am very proud that today we have a piece of legislation that's going through and will be quickly put before the body as soon as we return in about a week. So with that said, my friend, Mr. Cicilline, will be having his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing today and for giving us the chance to explore in detail what happened at the Turkish ambassador's residence on May 16th, just a little over a week ago, when President Erdogan's so-called security forces brutally assaulted peaceful protesters. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and to note that Ms. Usoyan, Mr. Yusa, and Mr. Hamparian were in attendance at the protests and will be sharing their firsthand accounts of what happened with us today, and I'm glad that none of you were seriously injured in the incident on the 16th, and I thank all of you for being with us, as well as Professor Wedgwood for being here today to discuss this incident and how it will affect U.S.-Turkish relations going forward. President Erdogan of Turkey recently consolidated his own control in a referendum giving him sweeping authority, as we all know, recently made an official visit to the United States to meet with President Trump. In that meeting, the two leaders discussed a variety of mutual interests, including the fight against ISIS, the failed coup plot against Erdogan last year, and other mutual interests. I think it's important to note, to point out one thing that by all accounts was not discussed, and that's Turkey's ongoing crackdown against fundamental freedoms, including freedom of the press and peaceful assembly. At no time did President Trump raise concerns about the crackdown being carried out by the Erdogan regime against dissidents, journalists, minorities, and anyone who speaks out against his government's abuses. Later that same day, President Erdogan was leaving the Turkish ambassador's residence when his guards became involved in an altercation with peaceful protesters, violently attacking Americans and others who were exercising their right to free speech on U.S. soil. Multiple videos from the scene showed Turkish security forces beating, kicking, and otherwise assaulting protesters, with the D.C. police officers attempting to break up the altercation. I understand we're going to see some of the video before this committee in just a few minutes. At least 11 individuals were seriously injured in the attack, with 2 requiring hospitalization. Equally disturbing is the video that appears to show President Erdogan surveying the scene of protesters in front of him, then verbally encouraging his guards to attack. It's my understanding that 2 Turkish security officers were detained in relation to their involvement in this incident, but were then released due to diplomatic immunity. I also understand that there is still an active investigation into the incident by the Washington, D.C. police force. Our State Department and Secretary Tillerson have rightfully condemned this egregious action by Turkish security forces and have called the Turkish ambassador in to raise their concerns. These are good first steps, but by no means do they resolve this issue. There are a few steps that absolutely must be taken as follow-up to this horrific incident. The United States government should request a waiver of immunity for anyone involved in the violent attack against peaceful protesters. The U.S. government must make clear that we expect full cooperation by the Turkish government into the investigation of this crime. The U.S. government must make clear to Turkey and any other government who wishes to have a presence in the United States that our laws, including the freedom of speech and assembly, are the binding laws of the land when they are on U.S. soil. And officials of the U.S. government, including the President and Secretary of State Tillerson, must make it clear that the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the right to free speech and freedom of assembly, are American values and will be prioritized in our relationships with every country with whom we have relations. To close, I want to emphasize that freedom, dignity, and equality are not just American values. They are universal values that every person deserves no matter where they are born. This idea that we can somehow leave our values at our shore's edge to focus on other priorities is inherently false. Our values make us who we are. They guide how we live our lives and how we interact in the world. The United States is a global leader precisely because people everywhere strive to achieve the freedoms that are afforded to us in our Constitution. When our top leaders say things such as, "We're not here to lecture," or "We don't expect others to adopt our values," it debases who we are and the very ideals that form our democracy, and it has dire consequences. I don't pretend that the Turkish government has suddenly changed its tune because of the words of a few government officials. They have been behaving badly on our soil for years. But this was a particularly brazen act on the heels of a highly publicized meeting with our president. And one has to wonder why President Erdogan felt so emboldened that in the bright D.C. sunshine, in front of cameras and hundreds of people, he sent his attack dogs out. As Secretary Tillerson said, this is simply unacceptable. Now we must decide how we're going to respond as a country and as government representatives to this brazen assault on our people and our values. I think the resolution that was passed by the full Foreign Affairs Committee this morning condemning this attack was an excellent start, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to determine the appropriate reaction going forward. And again, I thank the chairman for calling this meeting, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Brad Sherman for 5 minutes.
This was not just an attack on American values, on international values of human rights. This was an attack on American sovereignty. Quasi-military forces of a foreign nation beat and attacked Americans on American soil. This was deliberate because Erdogan believes that this helps him politically back in Turkey. We have to demonstrate to the world that aggression on American soil is not going to pay off. We need to do more than just condemn what happened, not only recently, but as others have pointed out, at Brookings as well. First, we've got to emphasize that unless we get a formal apology from Erdogan himself, we will not even discuss with them their concerns about the YPG. We've already decided that these valuable allies in the fight against ISIS will get American arms. But the people of Turkey have to understand that we're not even willing to listen to a government that attacks Americans on American soil and brags about it and boasts about it and tries to benefit from it back in its home country. The second thing we should do is prohibit the purchase or sale of the debt of the Turkish government by Americans or American banks and financial institutions and exchanges. Again, until we get a formal apology from Erdogan. I realize such an apology might be politically difficult for him. That's the point. We have to illustrate this, or we will have other leaders attacking Americans, both in their countries and in ours, for their own political reasons. Why was Erdogan so emboldened? Because we have had an American government that has cowered for generations rather than recognize the Armenian genocide. If we are so weak that we are a party to genocide denial, who should respect our laws or our sovereignty, or think that they'll pay any price for anything they do here in our country? Finally, the actions of those thugs have been compounded by the lies of the Turkish ambassador. Keep in mind, Erdogan was never in any danger whatsoever. The protesters were peaceful. They did not provoke any pro-Erdogan demonstrators. The statement of the ambassador to the contrary is a lie on top of physical aggression, and he should be asked to leave our country immediately. So this is really a test for the United States. We know who Erdogan is. The question is, who are we? Will we continue to be coward on the issue of the events of 1915 to 1923? Will we continue to walk on eggshells when we have a valuable ally in the fight against ISIS? And will we continue to see the banking institutions finance the Turkish government at a time when Erdogan is able to extract political benefit from this attack on America? We'll see how we respond. The resolution we passed in committee today needs to be just the first step. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman, and I will introduce the witnesses now, and then we will show the video, and then we will return to the witnesses. I would hope that 5 minutes max. We all have to be out of here no later than 2 o'clock, so we all need to watch the schedule on this. Again, I will introduce the witnesses, then we'll see the video and go to the testimony. As witnesses today, we have 3 people, and we have just joined by a 4th, who present outside the Turkish ambassadors, who were present outside the Turkish ambassador's residence on the 16th. Miss Lusik Usoyan is a founder and president of the Ezidi Relief Fund, an organization which advocates for refugees and displaced persons in the region. She was severely beaten, and I understand she is just now recovering. Mr. Murat Yusa, he's a local small business owner and an organizer within the Kurdish community. He was involved in leading some of the protests that took place during President Erdogan's visit. He too received a pummeling by members of the Turkish security service for his efforts. And Mr. Aram Hamparian, I hope I pronounced it correct. Okay. He is the executive director of the Armenian National Committee of America, a political organization that represents the interests of Armenian American community. He too was present for the attack on the 16th. Finally, we have Ms. Ruth Redgewood, a professor of international law and diplomacy at St. John's Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. She has served on the U.S. Secretary of State's Advisory Committee on Private and Public International Law, and she was a U.S. delegate to the UN Human Rights Committee and a member of the Pentagon Defense Policy Advisory Board, among many other things. She has earned her Juris Doctorate from Yale University, and we're very, very grateful that at a very short notice she was able to join us. Now with that, I think I would draw attention to my colleagues and to those who've come to the hearing today to the video, which was compiled. How was this compiled? It was the people who were there, I believe this is from handheld telephone cameras. Isn't it wonderful that we have these days?
I think our witness took the video, Aram.
Aram, did you take the video?
Some of it's from Voice of America and others from my
Okay. All I know is that I believe that the iPhone has done a lot to perfect our country by holding our law enforcement people accountable and also to protect our law enforcement people against unjust charges. So with that said, here it is. Jesus. Jesus. Oh, look how courageous they are. Jesus.
Who attacked you?
The Turks. The Turks attacked me. The Turks attacked me.
Hey! Lucy, you okay?
Come on, you gotta sit up for me. Tell them what's her name?
Lucy,
Lucy, you have to sit up for me.
you have a doctor here?
They're gonna call the ambulance. I don't see anything. Where did you hurt at so I can tell the ambulance? Where did you hurt it? With your head weight. Come on, Lucy, guys.
Is the ambulance on the way? This is a deep cut. This is a deep cut. Put pressure on this. Hold that tight. Put lots of pressure on your head. Yeah. It's bleeding. This is really deep cut. Put pressure on your nose, please.
Do we have the picture of everyone in the car?
They spliced together a couple of different films. Starting on
Is that the same one? Is that it? Let me note that there was one video that I saw that wasn't included in this that had a picture of Erdogan himself observing this attack. All of us should understand this is the United States of America. This is not Turkey. This foreign leader who treats his own people this way should understand that we are demanding an apology to these people, these Americans who were beaten here in the United States. And this is the way, if he's treating our people this way, what do you think he treats his own people? And we know that. And he has taken a country filled with people who like the United States and are friends of ours and turned them into prisoners and turned them into victims that we cannot ignore. We are on the side of a democratic Turkey and not this fascist, Islamic fascist dictatorship that Erdogan is superimposing on his people with that kind of violence. Now, with that said, we'll go to our witnesses. Again, we got about 5 minutes apiece and 5 minutes for questions because we got to be out of here at 2 o'clock. Gives us an hour and a half. So, Ms. Lusik Usoyan, who I've already introduced.
Thank you so much. Well, with a given opportunity, I would like to first express my gratitude to Chairman Dana Roebaker and Chairman Ed Royce and all ranking members for sponsoring this hearing in such a short time frame. As a citizen of United States of America, I feel very confident for my rights, and I am honored to be here to testify on the peaceful protest attack on May 16th. On May 16th, I was among those peaceful protesters. By exercising my freedom of speech, I was expressing my personal opinion on President Erdogan's White House welcome event. I believe that individuals like Mr. Erdogan, who systematically abuse his authority by violating human rights, press, imprison second largest opposition party, both co-chairs and its members committing war crimes and strongly support an ISIS terrorist group, has no space in the White House of United States of America. I am a Yazidi Kurd dissident by origin, and I am a Yazidi, and my Yazidi people have suffered significantly in the aftermath of the ISIS attack on Sinjar district on August 2014. Moreover, March 2016, Erdogan's visit to Washington, D.C., he had an event at Brookings Institute where I and many Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and Kurds have joined to a peaceful protest. As a result of Erdogan's angriness, he has contacted President of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, to attack Armenian Artsakh for 4 days. In the aftermath of 4 days' attack, around 80 Armenian soldiers were killed, and one was Yazidi origin soldier. He was beheaded by Azeri soldiers, and he happened to be my cousin. That said, I have many rights to express my angerness with Erdogan's abusive behavior. I was part of peaceful protesters in the front of White House. And once the event was over, me and others, we have walked towards Massachusetts Avenue, to Turkish ambassador's residency. There was a large group of people in front of Turkish ambassador's residency. As soon as we arrived, we began to hear cursings towards us and screamings at us. I could tell that the atmosphere became very tense once the pro-Erdogan's group saw us. Police has just asked us to stay where we are, and we stood and simply began our chantings, as we did in front of the White House. I can tell that We didn't have enough police officers. Right away, there was about 5 or so police officers, but they were doing their best job. And as we were chanting, I saw another group in about 5 people merging into existing group, pro-Erdogan's group, and running towards us. Those people were dressed differently. They were wearing dark sunglasses and khaki t-shirts and unbuttoned shirts. They were wearing military boots, I think. And I saw water bottles were thrown to us, one of which hit my leg, and I felt hurt. It hurt as if something was burning my leg, and I saw cell phones flying around. It happened very quickly. I didn't have a chance to think, to run away, or to protect myself. Next thing I know, I was on the ground, and someone was kicking me in the head. I remember only one thought. I thought, okay, I'm on the ground. I don't even trying to protect myself. What's the purpose of beating me? But then I lost unconscious. When I opened my eyes, I think it was over. I tried to get up, but my legs were very heavy. I don't know why. I believe police officer helped me to get up or sit, and I felt a massive headache and pain around my neck and back and head. I got shocked when I saw my friend's bloodied face. That evening, I spent in George Washington Hospital, as well as all other injured, which were about 8 or 9. The doctor gave me a painkiller and recommended to do a CAT scan to check my head condition, but I refused since I don't have insurance yet. Next morning, I opened my eyes and I feel extremely dizzy. I closed my eyes, but it didn't. It just got worse. And I tried to get up, in my room, but I just collapsed. And I'm very thankful to my friends who came visit me. They convinced me and they took me to the hospital. As a result, I ended up in ER to the George Washington again, and I was diagnosed with minor brain injury. The doctor says that I have bruises on my brain. So it will take me 6 weeks to recover. I think my time is over.
Good afternoon, Chairman Robert Baker and distinguished member of subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today about the brutal attack on peaceful protesters, including myself, by Turkish security forces outside the Turkish ambassador's residence on May 16, 2017. I'm proud father of US-born children. My biggest accomplishment has been to provide my children the freedom and security that I was deprived of as a child in Turkey. So imagine my disappointment and heartbreak when Erdogan and Turkish bodyguard violently attacked me for exercising my right to freedom of assembly on American soil. As somebody that takes pride in the fundamental Americans' value, it was hard for me to explain to my children why I was attacked and why Erdogan's goons were able to escape the US without any justice. For the past 30 years, I have attended countless protests because it is my right as an American citizen to do so. On Tuesday, May 16, 2017, I woke up early and I made my way into DC. I was there to protest against Erdogan as he visited the White House. I was there to protest against his direct attack on Kurds in Turkey. I was there to protest against unlawful imprisonment of Kurdish opposition. I was there to exercise my First Amendment right. I was there as an American citizen. Thereafter, a small number of us decided to continue our protest in front of the Turkish ambassador's residence. We arrived there at approximately 2:45 p.m. There was 15 of us on the sidewalk across the ambassador's residence. Among us were women and children under the age of 7. Just briefly after arriving, we began our protest and condemned Erdogan for his direct attack on the Kurds and the Kurdish children. One of our slogans was dedicated to Mr. Selahattin Demirtas, who is the co-chair of the pro-Kurdish political opposition in Turkey, Mr. Demirtas has been unlawfully arrested and still waiting for trial while in jail since November 2016. Our posters were pictures of Mr. Demirtas. Our slogans were freedom for Demirtas. Meanwhile, the pro-Erdogan supporters gathered across from us, across the street, were using insulting and vulgar words directed at us and children. After a verbal attraction, two pro-Erdogan supporters crossed the sidewalk and made their way into the street, ready to attack us. The DC police were able to intervene before the conflict escalated and attempt to get them back on the sidewalk. Thereafter, the police remained in front of the Turkish protester and tried to prevent them from attacking us. But after a few minutes, Erdogan's bodyguard, dressed in black suits and ties, pushed their way through the DC police and attacked our group. Erdogan's bodyguards were joined by the Turkish security personnel as well as supporters. There was more than 50 of them, some armed, but all were ready to attack. They came at us on such a force that even to DC police. Well, let me get in the detail of the attacking. When they attacked, 4 of them, and I saw the lady, Ms. Usoyan, was next to me. One of them is grabbed her and started to punch her face and kicking, and I tried to cover her, to try to cover her head, but I couldn't, and I fell down. 4 of them jumped on me. As you see on the picture, I'm the one carrying the megaphone, and they kicked me one after another on my face. And I tried to get up, but I couldn't. And I realized that they're not going to let me get up and respond them. So I just tried to cover my head, and I was unconscious. I don't know how long I was there. When I get up, I saw it's bleeding all over. And then the police officer, they helped me. My time is over.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Hamparian.
Thank you, Chairman Rohrabacher, for your very powerful and principled leadership on this issue. Congressman Cicilline, Congressman Sherman, thank you as well. I've submitted a written statement, and we'll just touch on a few points in my spoken testimony. Last Tuesday's attack was at its heart not just an attack against Americans, but an attack on American values. The facts of the attack, as well as last year's assault at the Brookings Institute, are well known to the subcommittee, as is Turkey's record of aggression at home and abuse as well. As has been noted, I participated in the peaceful protest at Sheridan Circle and was a witness to the brutal assaults. I was able to videotape much of it and share it with CNN and the Associated Press and others. Rarely, if ever, has a foreign government's attack against peaceful protesters on American soil been so thoroughly documented or so well reported. Thankfully, as the chairman noted, because of viral video and social media, President Erdogan today is finding he can't sweep this under the rug or explain it away with the help of his PR people, his apologists, or his well-paid lobbyists. Having, by all accounts, ordered this attack, he's gone on the offensive now, calling in our ambassador and falsely accusing U.S. law enforcement of aggressive actions. What he ordered on the streets of our capital here in Washington, D.C., provides a small insight, but a very chilling insight into the depth and the depravity of the violence visited every day upon citizens in Turkey, out of our city and away from our cameras. Imagine how bad that is if this is what they're going to do in Washington, D.C. These are the facts. This is pretty much where we are. We are, I think, as Americans, at a moment of reckoning on this issue. Not simply about Erdogan, but ourselves. We know who Erdogan is. Now it's time for him to understand who we are. This hearing, Mr. Chairman, is certainly about foreign policy. This is the Foreign Affairs Committee. But at a more fundamental level, it's about our shared commitment, our shared American commitment to our First Amendment and our freedoms. The question before us is, how will we respond to Ankara exporting its intolerance and violence to our shores? How will we respond to Erdogan's unapologetic attempt to bully Americans as he has bullied his own citizens? How will we answer Erdogan's arrogance? His attempts now, and these are disgraceful, to have Americans throw our people, our police, and even our principals under the bus to avoid offending his irrational and hateful sensitivities is simply unacceptable. We cannot do that to the brave officers who sought to defend the protesters or the Americans who simply sought to give voice to their views. The choice is ours. I would humbly and respectfully offer a couple of suggestions. One is that President Trump can break his silence on the issue and forcefully condemn this attack on peaceful protesters in our nation's capital. Our government, including our Department of Justice, should fully investigate and criminally prosecute the attackers, demanding that Turkey issue a blanket waiver of diplomatic immunity for all involved in this assault up and down the chain of command. Last Tuesday, let's be clear, last Tuesday was a crime. It was not a conflict. Multiple felonies committed on film in plain sight of U.S. law enforcement. The administration should, as Senator McCain and others have recommended, exercise our right to immediately expel Turkey's ambassador from the U.S. This would represent both an expression of our national outrage, but also a reaffirmation of our commitment to freedom of expression. Legislatively, we look forward to the passage of HRES 354, which the committee favorably reported this morning, and that has the support of the chairman and also the full committee chairman, Mr. Royce, and the bipartisan leadership of the House. We also, and this speaks to what Congressman Sherman said, we should also encourage the adoption of HRES 220, a bipartisan measure seeking simply to apply the lessons of Turkish genocide against the Armenians, the Greeks, the Assyrians, and other Christians in order to prevent future atrocities. Again, let's be very clear on this point. The same Recep Erdogan who attacks our people and disrespects our police is allowed to set U.S. policy on the Armenian genocide. This foreign dictator is the guy who green lights or stoplights whether or not America can speak out on a human rights issue, and that's disgraceful. He's been allowed, and this is disgraceful as well, President Erdogan has been allowed to revel in the spectacle of arm-twisting America into silence on a known case of genocide, documented in our own archives. He has bullied us into silence on our history, and now he has our values in his sights. It must stop, and it must stop here. In closing, let me thank you again, Chairman Rohrabacher, for your tremendous leadership on this issue. Let me also say that public scrutiny is the best remedy to these types of things, and for that reason, this hearing is so very welcome. Thank you, sir.
That's why we wanted to have this hearing right away. Let it sink into people's memory. Ms. Wedgwood?
Thank you very much, Chairman. The meeting is enormously important and very timely. I used to be a prosecutor. I thought I was all, and I was not particularly merciful to all of my defendants, but I did think that I was doing something not just in taking people off the street for its own sake, but deterring other people from engaging in episodes. And I almost was killed at one point when the FALN bombed the federal courthouse in 1982 when I was preparing my first RICO case. And my husband and I were there. We should have been goners, but happily the bridge made of concrete quelled the blast. So I know what it is indeed, and I deeply sympathize with my colleagues here who have felt that they were at the brink of death, because it is a possible event for human beings. As a prosecutor, certainly we did everything we could to try to quell terrorist groups with RICO and other measures. So, but I do think that to send the message now to Turkey, there does need to be fairly dramatic, demonstrative measures taken. Whether it hurts our tourist trade or not, I don't really care. I think that this is a guy who's a thug. He's a Goomba. He's not an ordinary human being. He has decided to be a bully. One could make the surmise that if he bullies individual people, he will tend to bully the region. Would he be a reliable ally? No. Does there have to be a change of leadership? Yes. I don't know how you do that. We have many modalities. We have sanctions. We've had other ways in the past. The Turks have always been mistreated, I think, in Germany by not being allowed to naturalize. I've always been in favor of allowing them to naturalize in Germany. But it's going to be much harder to make that argument if Turkey itself is so grotesquely mistreating people who fall into its power. I know that it's complicated to quell ISIS, and that there's the kind of Game of Thrones that one has to play to keep alliances together is very, very tricky. But this kind of inconceivable, unabashed quelling, if I may use a Yiddish word, kind of brutality, will be copied by other countries around the world, too, if they see that it takes and it's effective. So if you want a China that's not particularly more outrageous than usual on human rights and civil liberties, then you have to do something about Erdogan. And that goes throughout the region. Duterte and the Philippines have become very difficult. There's a copycat effect in the moral politics of human rights. So I would indeed endorse what the chairman has done of treating this with the utmost sobriety and making plain to President Donald Trump that he can't be best buds with this guy. No skiing, no bowling, no hugs. Rather, I would PNG him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and
That's what you really think.
we will have Mr. Cicilline, and then I will recognize Judge Poe, who's just joined us, and then will Mr. Sherman, and I will do the wrap-up. But I'd ask for 5 minutes each, if we can.
Thank you again to our witnesses, and I am very sorry that you had the experience you had, and seeing it on the video makes it even more disturbing. I think it's worth noting again that the response given by the Turkish embassy was not only inaccurate, it was horrifying because it attempted to blame you, the victims, and others for the conduct of these security forces, and so it compounds the offense to this country and to citizens of America. So I want to first just ask the witnesses who were there and observed this. Did any of you actually see President Erdogan either before, during, or after the attack? Did anyone actually see him?
The position we wouldn't be able to see
You wouldn't have been
him.
able to see him, okay.
But we realized that when he arrived, there was a noise come from his supporter.
Yeah.
Then we understood he was there.
Yeah. And were you able to see, any of you, where the attackers, the men in the dark suits, went after the attack?
Where did they
They
went?
go after the attack.
They came to attack us.
Right, and then after it was over, did you see where they went?
They went back to the Turkish ambassador's residency.
Okay.
Actually, they were in a very harsh conflict with DC police officers.
And you actually saw them go back into the residence of the Turkish ambassador?
Yes, because I was asking police officers, why do you guys don't arrest these people? I witnessed this, and one police officer has asked me to identify some of them who I really remember, and I identified some of them. But while I was identifying, I could hear them screaming at some other police officers, yelling at them, saying, you guys can't do your job and, not competent.
And in that day or subsequent to that day, have each of you been in contact or been interviewed by the DC Police Department?
Yes, I have.
Yes. Yeah, and we've provided evidence to the Secret Service on the DC Police.
Great. I do think that it's important to make mention that as we think about the veracity of statements coming out of the Turkish embassy, we must be reminded of the refusal of the Turkish government to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. It calls into question not only their treatment of the 3 witnesses we've heard from, but their willingness to accept the truth and to share that. And so it should maybe not be surprising, but it's still disappointing to see the statement that the Turkish ambassador issued. And I appreciate you coming before this committee today and sharing your firsthand accounts of what is a deplorable incident and something that we have a responsibility to address in a very, very serious way. Professor Wedgwood, my first question really is, can you help us understand what legal recourse we have against the Turkish guards who were involved in this attack? Will all of them be protected by diplomatic immunity, and is there a mechanism for Turkey to waive that immunity if they wanted to?
If Turkey wants to offer the conceit, the fiction, that this was not authorized from the top, then they would waive the immunity. They'd say these were guys out on a holiday, they're having some fun, they got carried away, and therefore we waive their immunity. That would discourage other people in the security services from ever taking that role again, by the way.
So let me speculate. So in other words, if the actions that these guards took was not authorized by the president of the country or a top official, then they do not enjoy diplomatic immunity?
Well, first, the lower down the food chain you get, the less immunity you have. So permanent representatives to the UN or ambassadors get absolute full tilt immunity. As you go down the rank order of the ordinary structure of an embassy, you get to official acts immunity pretty quickly. So a cook or a driver, at best, would have official acts immunity. One can make the argument, none of this was official acts. Official acts are when you go across the street and you accidentally stumble and hit a woman and on your way to vote at the General Assembly. But deliberate, malicious attacks like this, these are not official
So
acts.
doesn't that argue for charging these officers and letting them claim and prove that they're entitled to diplomatic immunity?
I might be inclined to have a little, I don't mean this in the way it's going to sound, fun. Just to take him, what happens to an ordinary perp
Right.
when he's arrested.
Right.
And then we can have a debate in court, and it'll go up to the Supremes, on whether or not they're immune. But that itself is a very important kind of political, don't use the word theater advisedly, but it's an expose of the vulgarity of what they did.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
We're now joined by a distinguished jurist, but also a great member of the United States Congress from Texas, Judge Poe.
And I thank the chairman, thank all y'all for being here. All y'all is plural to y'all, in case you were wondering. Being from Texas, I just wanted to tell you our language. This episode that occurred against you three and the others, protesters, just makes me so mad that this would occur in the United States. How ironic it is that you're out there protesting and demonstrating for basic civil rights in Turkey, and Erdogan and his Gestapo gang come over here and try to prevent you from having basic civil rights in the United States. And I find that appalling. I mean, I'm a former judge. Don't hold that against me, but you know, the Constitution is a big deal. We are unique among nations because we have this concept of the Bill of Rights. And the First Amendment is first because it's the most important amendment. And the right to free speech and peaceably assemble are both in the First Amendment, 2 of the 5. And I am convinced they are there because that First Amendment is the most important. You don't have that one, you don't have the rest of them. And so I find this very disturbing. What I saw in the video is what most people did see, that all of a sudden, here comes this gang of folks start beating up people who are just exercising the First Amendment in the United States. And I find it reprehensible that a tyrant from another country would come to the United States and violate our basic Constitution so flagrantly. And I saw him in the video, and he's looking at what's taking place. And then he casually goes on into the embassy for supper or whatever they were doing. So it seems to me that there needs to be some consequences. And on the diplomatic level, I'm not sure what they ought to be. I've been called a lot of things, but I've never been called diplomat. And I find this something that we just have to deal with. Foreign power in the United States violating the First Amendment of the Constitution. That's a big deal when that happens. And you can prosecute all the cases as far as I'm concerned. Ms. Wedgwood, you'd be glad to do that. Do any of you believe or know that the attack was ordered by Erdogan, or was it made by a decision of the security folks? Any of you know that? Anyone want to answer that?
I can tell you, at the time, I was convinced that an order was given and the guys attacked, because it felt like that. There was a tension in the air, and then someone pulled a trigger and the attack started. But that's all I knew. It was just a feeling from the other side of the street. And then when I watched the video of President Erdogan's guards, and some journalists did like a frame-by-frame analysis, and they did some audio analysis where they played with the audio in order to be able to hear exactly what was being said. And that confirmed in my mind my hunch that this was ordered. And it seemed very much from the video that the word came from the car where President Erdogan was sitting to his advisor, to a bodyguard, and then boom, all within 5 seconds.
In Turkish, he says, Servet, dalın dalın diyor. Means Servet is a person. This is what he says. Servet, he says attack, attack in that video. So we have no doubt that the order comes directly from Erdogan.
And at a minimum, he could have turned it off right away, and he didn't.
Well, that's what I was saying. He's standing there watching it. Rather than say stop, he goes into the embassy or ambassador's house, like just utter contempt for the protesters. Are the three of y'all going back out there and protest some more in front of the Turkish embassy?
I'm up. First of all, Judge, if you're there, we have your back. We'll be there any day, anytime, night or day. And
We already offered in the Foreign Affairs Committee to go jointly.
Yeah, we got a lot of yays in the Foreign Affairs Committee to go back out there with you and protest, mainly protesting the denial of free speech.
I think simply the presence of members of Congress in that circle at any time, at a time that works for the members, even if it's a short visit, it will be so powerful and so symbolic. Offer some remarks and basically remind the Turkish government that that soil is American soil. I felt very strongly, this is a hunch I had again on the day of, was the people who did the attacking felt like this was their world. There was no hesitance, no reticence whatsoever. There were police telling them to stop, and they ignored it the way I've never seen anyone ignore the police on American soil. It was total arrogance. This is our place. And let's remind them that's not their place. Sheridan Circle, right, is ours. It's American.
If I could just add, Congressman, that's a diplomatic neighborhood. The American Society of International Law, which has a townhouse, which they finally paid off, is about 15 degrees around the circle. So, and there are lots of other diplomatic establishments there. So this is like the Schmata district for diplomats.
Well, as far as I know, this has never happened in the United States by any other embassy that has been here or any other ambassador or head of state. Once again, I find this appalling. Thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
All right, so the word is out to the Erdogan gang. Judge Poe is on the way, and he's taking the posse. He's bringing a posse with him, Mr. Sherman, including me.
Can I say something?
Yes, sir, and then Mr. Sherman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, say.
Well, I am definitely going to go protest Erdogan in front of the Turkish embassy, but this time I'm not only carrying the megaphone, I want to make sure I have a baseball helmet too.
Baseball.
Mr.
Yes, before I focus on the events of the embassy, Ms. Usoyan?
Yeah.
The Ezidi people are among are probably the most oppressed people from ISIS. Which countries and groups in the area have provided safe haven or otherwise cooperated in the protection of the Yazidis?
Well, there have been a lot of countries that accept Yazidi refugees,
I
but in a very
mean in the
little
area.
amount.
I know that
Yeah.
your
So, as you know, I have traveled to the region, and I saw very protected Yazidis in northern Syria, which is under control of YPG currently, because their rights as Yazidi minority have been respected. They have not been placed in the camps with Muslim refugees or even Christians. They have separate camp, and they were very thankful for what they have.
So the YPG has been helpful. Any other groups that have protected Yazidis there?
Yes, in the August attack, it was YPG who created the Green Corridor, and about 50,000 Yazidis, they fled to northern Syria. As of today, I visited the camp, which is hosting 5,000 families.
And how has the Turkish government treated the Yazidis?
Well, there was a case last year that Yazidis were trying to travel to Hungary, and they were beaten up and placed to the prison. And yes, and now there was only a few camps that was under districts or control of HDP. So that right has been taken away from HDP, and Yazidi refugees has been spread all over the Turkey. So it's very, very difficult for Yazidis to survive in Turkey.
I want to now focus on our reaction to this Turkish outrage. Erdogan lives by fanning grievance mentality in Turkey. And I don't want to help him do that. At the same time, we need to respond. We've got Mr. Gulen living in the United States. The Turkish government has made a number of claims for his extradition. I think we have to declare very firmly, they've got no credibility. There is nothing that makes me feel better about Mr. Gulen than the attacks that come from Ankara. I mean, I was suspicious of the guy until I heard the attacks from Ankara. There's no credibility in the charges, and certainly no credibility that if he were ever to be in Turkey, that he would be treated with justice. We can expand our involvement with the YPG. We have already decided to do that now that Mr. Flynn is no longer making these decisions or helping to shape them. We haven't talked about forcing them to waive civil liability, but those who suffered should be able to sue the Turkish government. There's more than ample evidence. And perhaps that being an economic matter, we can tie it, as I said before, to allowing Turkish debt to be sold in the United States or purchased by Americans. We've already talked about expelling their ambassador. Obviously, our failure to recognize the genocide emboldens Erdogan every day. From amongst this palette of possible reactions or others, I'd like our witnesses to say, what do we do that demonstrates to the Turkish people that this kind of thuggery is harmful to their interests? What do we do to punish and seek recompense from the Erdogan government without playing into his grievance game?
If I may, I really have a good list of proposals, and I think you would just smile and you would agree with me. But I just want to make sure that this hearing has a follow-up, and Turkish government will proceed to see the consequences from U.S. authorities. Because if next time, let's say, President Erdogan, if he comes, I will make sure to go to the front line and begin to chant whatever I was chanting on Tuesday, May 16th. But I'm just afraid that if we let this go unnoticed or unfollowed, they will just kill us next time. And I don't think, social media has covered worldwide, and I receive messages from all around the world. It doesn't show our leadership as strong if such action is happening.
Do we have anything to add, keeping in mind that persuading the Trump administration to do anything, I mean, we got a statement out of Tillerson, has been difficult. Some of these things could be done by Congress. Mr. Hamparian.
It is in the president's hands, but the expulsion of the ambassador, I think, it would send a good message. That's the language of diplomacy. And also, Ambassador Kilic is a partisan to this issue. He's not, in my opinion, sort of career foreign service guy. He's an Erdogan guy. He was out there yelling at the cops. That's the right message, and I think it will be the right one to send.
And Congress could, of course, pass a resolution calling upon him to be expelled, and perhaps going further and declaring that members of Congress shouldn't meet with him. Ms. Wedgwood, do you have...
I'm trying to be creative. He doesn't necessarily need the big residence that he has. If somebody's here, ordinarily one respects the suggestion of the government as to what grand house on Massachusetts Avenue they might choose to inhabit, but it doesn't. And I suppose the property is. It would be interesting to look at the title to the property, see who owns it, but certainly in its ambassadorial function, that can be taken away. Or one can demand that it be for a much smaller,
I'm worried
darker.
about the tit for tat, and I'm especially worried about the safety of our diplomats in Ankara.
No, that's true.
Any other comment? I've gone over. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sherman. I remember years ago, there was a movie about guys in black. Do you remember that movie? It was The Men in Black. The Men in Black. I'm looking at these guys running across the way in their black outfits. I mean, this is right out of a sick, B movie, and and only then, the men in black, they were out to expose monsters. And in this movie, the men in black are the monsters. And they're working for the monster who's watching on the side. Brad, you made a good point about Gulen. We remember this. The perception that we now have of the Turkish government and of Erdogan himself has now been shaped and changed forever. He will never, he can come and beg forgiveness all he wants. We have his number now. The American people have given, look, we have tried our best to reach out to Turkey, trying to give every benefit of the doubt. I had 4 hearings on Turkey, trying to make sure that, and in each one of them, trying to make sure that they knew exactly how we appreciated the friendship of the Turkish people, especially during the Cold War. And what this has done now is expose us to the fact that they have an oppressive government there that is totally different than those people who worked with us during the Cold War. They are no longer our friends because the president, the head of their country now, can watch this and then call our ambassador in to castigate us after seeing this firsthand. He saw this firsthand. One wonders, when he talks about Gulen, we have to take into consideration what he did here. Obviously, you have a fascistic megalomaniac in charge of the government of Turkey, who is so consumed with his own power that he thinks he can call people together and tell us that we were wrong when we see our citizens being beaten into the dirt, American dirt. So when we must take that into consideration when this is the guy he wants to close down all these schools. The Gulen movement, after this, we should note the Gulen movement is probably a very positive thing. Those of us who are kind of, okay, what's this all about? Well, this should cement what we think of them. We also needed to know what we thought about the supposed coup that took place in which Erdogan himself assumed so much power as using the supposed coup as an excuse. If Erdogan can sit and watch this and then ask us for an apology, what does that tell us about his honesty in dealing with his own people? I would say that if there was ever any doubt that that was a phony coup that Erdogan has used in order to destroy his opposition or anyone who disagrees with him in Turkey, this should settle those issues as to whether or not he's a megalomania fascist or whether or not he is just a president who is in a volatile situation. I would ask my colleagues to, again, join me in working with Judge Poe. If this man tries to come again, I pledged today at the hearing that I would be with Judge Poe outside that embassy. And now, a couple last thoughts, and that is, look, this is not the first time this has happened in America, okay? There have been other cases where dissidents have been here, and they have been beaten up. And the Chinese, I know about 10 years ago, we saw this happen with some Chinese, actually it might have been 20 years ago now, when you had Chinese people demonstrating, and they ended up being beaten up by people coming from out of their embassy. And that doesn't happen anymore, and we put a stop to that. But it's not something, this isn't something that we can, as we've said here today, this will determine who we are. After all these words, what I just said, what Erdogan is, what we do now will determine who we are. And it will determine also what kind of president we have. I will have to say that I am a little disturbed, but of course, I am one person who tries to put things in perspective. I would say this is the State Department should, if State Department can deal with this, when they are so tough on what the Russians, whenever the Russians get out of line, and I voted with you today in condemning when the Russians got out of line, that tells us something. We need to make sure that things are in perspective, and Erdogan has now defined for us that perspective. We expect that as Americans, we will make sure that he understands that he is the one who set the rules. He's the one who has established the perception and the type of relationship we will have. And it is not going to be like it was 10 years ago with a friendly Turkish government where we tried to give them the benefit of the doubt every time we could. That will not happen again. So with that said, I'm going to give each one of my fellow members 1 minute to end, and I'm going to give you guys the last say for 1 minute. Brad, you got 1 minute.
I think it's been said. This is a test of who we are and how we react, and I look forward to working with members of this subcommittee to do more than token responses until such time as Erdogan formally and personally apologizes for what happens.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. You know, when we speak about foreign policy, we typically speak about the best interests of the American people and the national security interests of the United States. We don't typically contemplate in the discussion of foreign policy that it implicates the protections of the American people on our own soil from violent actions of a foreign government. But I think the chairman is right. This is a moment in which the commitment of the United States in terms of our basic human rights, our basic freedoms that we are so proud of, that we hold up to the world, our commitment to that will be tested by the way we respond to the actions of a foreign government coming to America and attacking people who are peacefully protesting, which is a bedrock of our democracy. And I promise, as a member of this subcommittee and as a member of Congress, I will do all that I can to vindicate those sacred rights and to insist that the Turkish government, President Erdogan, accept full responsibility for his conduct, and that we stand strong in the view of the rest of the world with respect to our commitment to important human rights. And I yield back.
Judge Poe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think our message should be to the tyrant that you don't mess with American citizens and their constitutional rights, or you will rue the day that you ever did. Now, let's make sure there is a consequence for what occurred against you. I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
And I will yield 1 minute to each of our witnesses to sum up, but 1 minute, and we got to go.
Well, I have always been proud to be a citizen of America, of United States of America. Now, seeing a great response from Congress, from Senate, from fellow Americans, I feel so thankful and so grateful for the fact that I'm on this land and that my rights are protected and I have people who care deeply about me. I feel very much loved, and I really appreciate all of your work.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here in front of you, and it's my also honor to be American citizen. And the best thing I gave my children, they were born here and they are American citizens. This is the best thing happened to them. And last sentence, as a Kurdish from Turkey, an American citizen, if this is what they do us here, imagine what they do, the Kurds, Armenian, Greek, others against the government in Turkey, what they do.
Excellent point. Thank you.
I would just offer that probably within minutes of this video going viral, the Turkish lobby kind of like started, racking up their billable hours, and they're going to work state, they're going to work White House, they're going to work the Hill, they're going to do all that stuff to try to manage this process and dumb it down and get us past it and cover it up and explain it away. So I would simply say, encourage the subcommittee to respectfully encourage the subcommittee to follow up with DOJ and to follow up with the DC police just to make sure that these prosecutions move forward. There were multiple felonies committed on film. Some of them were diplomatic and some are out of the country. Others are here. and the prosecution should move forward. If they don't move forward, that will be the barometer. That will be the canary in the coal mine that this is getting massaged and covered up.
I'd do two things. One is I would have one of you gentlemen, or all five of you, four of you, five of you, to have a mano with President Trump and make clear to him in private why he ought not to cozy up to this guy. Because I'm not sure that there has been enough distance from the White House vis-a-vis Erdogan. And it's just bad mojo all the way around if the White House appears to be congenial. I also would be curious where Erdogan keeps his money. Everybody has offshore accounts, Channel Islands, you name it, they got it. And while I'm sure he has his fortunes scattered around the world, it would be interesting to know, and it's not that hard to find out nowadays, where folks have their money, and if there are people who have suffered damages as a consequence, when and if he leaves office, or if some country chooses to have to take a narrow interpretation of presidential immunity. There are suits to be filed and fun to be had.
United States, U.S. It's just us. That's all it is. United States, every race, every religion, every ethnic group is made up in this family of Americans. And we will determine and show that we are outraged by and act upon what our values really are, and not just what our words are. But protect one American, protects all. This hearing is adjourned.